Townsend, Massachusetts, 1987. A small New England place hugged by pine trees and back roads, where the air smelled like chimney smoke in the winter and fresh cut grass in the spring. The houses were modest, white lapboard siding, green shutters, porches with sagging rocking chairs, and yards littered with bikes and swing sets. You could hear the hum of a dishwasher through an open window or the clink of plates being set for dinner. Nothing fancy, just warm, simple food that filled the house and fed the family. By December, the leaves were long gone and the skies were soft and gray. The ground stayed frozen and snow flurries came and went like whispers. Christmas lights were starting to show up on fences and rooftops. You could walk down the street, you could smell balsam and cold air and burnt wood. Kids would build snowmen or pull each other on sleds. And if it got too cold, they'd huddle in someone's garage or basement, sip cocoa and trade cards. And somewhere inside, the sound of Wheel of Fortune on the TV. Teenagers would pile into a friend's old beat-up truck, park under the streetlight in the school parking lot, or just off a back road near the woods. They'd smoke cigarettes stolen from someone's parents. Crackling cassette tapes played low in the background. Def Leppard, Springsteen, Madonna, or The Cure, and on weekends they'd cruise up to the Dunkin' Donuts in Finchburg. It was an ordinary, familiar, and safe town, or at least that's what folks thought.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
So, we have a trivia question today?
Yes, in 1858, this is a hard one. So
Okay.
if you know this one, you're like a true crime genius. Humbug Billy accidentally killed 21 people and made hundreds more ill when he sold what treat that had accidentally been made with arsenic? A, Swiss rolls, B, mince pie, C, peppermint candy, or D, jellied eels.
Oh, okay. Well, I really don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to give an educated guess.
Okay.
Somewhat educated. I'm going to say peppermint candies.
You're right.
Okay, because I was
Yes.
just thinking, they have like that white powdery type. Do I get a prize?
Yeah.
Bragging rights.
Okay, so you have an update?
I have an update for you. I don't know if you saw it. It was posted in our Facebook group, actually.
No, guys, I have not been on. I get on there like very rarely.
Well, you have been really busy.
Yes.
So, I did the episode of just a few weeks ago about the Arkansas, the doctor,
Yes.
Porter Rogers.
Yes.
And Peggy Hale was his young lover
Yes.
who was part of this crime. My friend sent me her obituary, which I posted in our group. And her obituary actually had a lot of good things to say about her as she got older.
I did see that.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
And she seemed to be very well loved.
Yes.
Well, her sister-in-law saw that somehow. So she posted in, and at first she thought it was just looking for dirt on Peggy Hale.
Right.
And so she was like, taking up for her. But basically what she was saying was that Peggy did repent and always felt bad about her part in those murders.
Wow.
And she had made a comment to her one time that when she gets to heaven, she hopes that she's able to just serve that lady there.
Oh, that makes me want to cry for some reason.
Doesn't it?
Oh, gosh.
And so I did post back and assure her, I wasn't looking for dirt, that I love a good redemption story, especially when we
Oh.
hear about them, of the cases we've covered.
Yes.
And so, it does really sound like Peggy Hale repented of her part in that and really
Yeah.
truly had a genuine, conversion.
Yes, absolutely. Gosh, that was sad for some reason. That struck me.
Wasn't it? I know, because it's just a good redemption story. I mean, and again, that doesn't mean that I don't think she shouldn't have served a little more time. But the fact is, when she got to heaven, she did get mercy and grace. That's just a beautiful thing.
It is. And we all are going to need that.
Yes, we are.
So I have one of the scariest stories that I've told on here.
Well, I hope it doesn't give me bad dreams, because I'm listening to a scary book right now, an Audible book.
Oh.
There was a scene in it the other night I was listening while I was asleep, and it scared me to death.
Oh, no.
So,
well, we'll see if this one does,
Yeah.
okay? So this actually happened in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, way back in the 80s. So in early 1986, tragedy struck the Bowdens when the beloved mother and wife of this family passed away after a hard battle with cancer. She had a 15-year-old daughter named Tina and a younger daughter named Karen, and they were devastated, of course, by the loss of their mother. Their home, it used to be this happy, boisterous place. Frank did his best to hold the family together emotionally, financially, and physically. I can imagine, I don't know how difficult that must have been for him, trying to stay strong for his daughters while carrying his own heartbreak. On top of his grief, Frank had to work longer hours to keep that household afloat because he had to miss so much time when his wife was sick.
Sure.
You can't get that time back. And so he, wanted to be there for her as much as he could. And now he was having to make up for that.
Yeah.
So the girls missed their mother terribly. And though life kept going, as it does, school goes on, friends visited from time to time. And Tina, the oldest, even went on a few dates, but nothing felt the same. Everything was heavier. And there was just this kind of black cloud hovering over them, the kind of pain that doesn't leave you, even when you're laughing and trying to pretend things are normal. But one thing the sisters, Tina and Karen, did have was each other. They were extremely close. They had a special bond, and they leaned on each other for comfort and support. One night, not long after their mother had passed, the girls were at home alone, hanging out, doing homework. They made supper and were just sitting, eating, and chit-chatting, watching some TV, when they heard this knocking sound coming from the walls. They ran outside, like one does when you hear knocking coming from your walls. Then they were like, okay, it's probably animal, the furnace, whatever. And they kind of felt silly. So they came back inside and heard it again. They looked at each other, scared. It would stop for a minute or two and then start all over again. This steady, deliberate knocking.
Okay, that is scary.
This went off and on for almost an hour. The girls were in hysterics. So when their dad, Frank, got home from work, the girls run out to tell him what's happening. But like parents did in the 80s, he said, it's probably just the house creaking. Did you ever hear that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I swear.
The house settling.
Yes. I think that chains could have been dragged down the hallway and they would have still said, it's just the house creaking.
And most of the time it really was.
But yeah, the girls, they did try to explain, no, this was not a creak. This was not a pop. It was a knocking. But Frank was not having it. He's like, girls, calm down. And of course, as strange noises do, they stopped when their father got home.
Yeah.
So that night, though, after their dad went to bed and the sisters went to bed, the knocking started again.
That's scaring me already.
Very close to them, like from their walls. The room was quiet otherwise, and when they ran to get their dad again, it stopped until he went back to bed, and then it started again. And then Tina had this thought, and she turned to her sister in the dark, and she whispers, do you think it's Mom?
Oh.
Do you think she's trying to talk to us?
Oh.
And I get it. They were missing their mom so bad, and they're trying to make sense of this thing that they can't explain. They probably hoped it was more than anything. So then Tina speaks out loud into the room, Mom, if it's you, knock 3 times. And y'all, it knocked 3 times.
You're even scaring Rufus. That is terrifying.
Yes. In my mind's eye, I can see those girls like clinging to each other, half terrified, half hopeful.
Yeah.
So the next day, Tina and Karen decided to try something. They borrowed a Ouija board. And yes, we all know nothing good ever comes from messing with those things. I don't care what anybody says. It's not a game. You start opening those doors. You don't know what's going to walk through them. But these girls were desperate. And they just wanted to feel a connection to their mom. And you have to feel for them.
Yeah.
And I can understand why it felt like a good idea in that moment. They sat down in their living room, lit a couple of candles, and they started asking questions. Is anyone there? Is this our mom? And the planchette moved. Now, whether one of them did it subconsciously or what, it scared them half to death.
Yeah.
And instead of feeling peace, the house started to feel even heavier and darker. And the knocking sounds, they were more frequent. They were louder. They started to hear footsteps in places that no one could have been. The girls were terrified and started to believe this wasn't their mother, but an evil spirit.
Okay, I have a theory of what I think that knocking is, but I'm going to hold it until the end.
Okay. So radios and TVs would turn on by themselves. Doors would crack open when no one was around. Tina and Karen, they were genuinely terrified. And not only that, but their dad wouldn't listen to them because he thought it was grief.
Yeah, well, I can understand that too. I think I would be that parent that would be like, you're imagining this.
And like he found out about the girls doing the Ouija board and he talked to them about it, but I think he was like us. He felt bad.
Sure.
So they'd wake up in the middle of the night to hear what sounded like soft whispering coming from the walls. The girls would bolt into their dad's room, telling him the house is haunted. But he's this practical, no-nonsense guy, and he's starting to lose patience. He's like, there is no such thing as ghost. But that wasn't helpful to them with what they were experiencing. They would beg him to please check the attic, please check the basement, check behind the furniture. And him, frustrated, exhausted, having to get up for work the next morning, he would get up and stomp around the house with a flashlight just to shut them up. And after a while, he started thinking, are they just making this up to get attention? So one night, Tina and Karen, they're home alone while their dad was working late, and they heard it, a knock. But this time, it wasn't in the walls. It was coming from the basement. The girls didn't feel sane anymore. They were terrified, and they were mad at this point, and they decided to confront this evil and demand it leave. This was their house. And so they grabbed the biggest butcher knife that they could find, and they slowly crept down the basement stairs. When they reached the bottom, the knocking sound stopped and there was dead silence. But then as they turned to go back up the stairs, on the basement wall, written in blood, was a message. I'm in your room. Come and find me.
This sounds like a horror movie.
The girls screaming to the top of their lungs, practically knocking each other down the stairs to get out of there. They run to their neighbors as fast as they can. And the neighbors, they call Frank and they call the police. But when they came and looked around, they discovered that quote unquote blood was actually ketchup. The police told Frank, there's nothing to worry about. We've seen stuff like this before with grief and kids. And they just believed that it was the girls. And they didn't want them punished. They felt bad for them. But Frank, on the other hand, he had had enough. This was plumb embarrassing. So he sat the girls down and told them, that's it. I'm getting you two into a therapist. This has gone, way too far. The girls cried and begged him to believe them. They were literally being tormented and felt like they were losing their minds.
And none of this ever happened when Frank was around?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
But Frank got the girls and he did get them into therapy. And he was a good dad. He loved his girls.
Yeah.
And sure enough, things did calm down. So the girls had even started thinking, maybe this was all in our head. Maybe this was grief, like a shared delusion type of thing. But then on the night of December 6th in 1986, the Bowen family had been out visiting friends for dinner. Frank thought it would do them some good, a little normalcy for him and the girls with their friends and family. And so they ended up staying a little bit later than planned. They got caught up in conversation and reminiscing about the girl's mother and sharing old memories. It was actually one of the first nights. You got to remember their mother, she died at the beginning of 1986.
A whole year. Okay.
So it was one of the first nights in a long time that the Bowens had really enjoyed themselves together. But when they finally made it home and opened the front door, they were met by the blaring noise of every TV and radio in the house turned up to full volume. The lights were blazing in every room, and Frank is just kind of wide-eyed and confused. He steps inside, the blaring noise of the TV filling the room, and he reached to turn off the living room TV. He moved into the kitchen. The girls are behind him. They probably know what's going on.
Right. This is his first experience.
Thank God, like, we're being validated here.
And it's his first time experiencing anything like they've said.
Exactly. So his mind is racing, trying to make sense of this. And that's when he saw it. On the kitchen table, there were 2 glasses of champagne. These were the glasses that he and his late wife had used on their last wedding anniversary before she passed away. Can you imagine?
Mm-mm.
So he didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that, but what the crap? Then he saw a picture, and this was a photograph of his daughter, Tina, stuck to the wall with a butcher knife.
Oh, yeah. Threatening.
So his heart is pounding now. And again, any sane person would have ran, but Frank and the girls, they push forward through the house and up the stairs. They're going up, and like on the dresser, like where the landing was, there is the words that say "marry me" in blood.
This is just all kinds of weird and creepy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then he goes on in to his bedroom, and he reaches for the closet door. What he saw is the stuff of nightmares, is all I can say, because inside there is a man dressed in his late wife's wedding gown, in a fur coat thrown over his shoulders, a blonde wig sitting crooked on his head, Indian war paint on his face, and in one hand he had an axe, and in the other he had a huge steel wrench.
What in the world?
So this was not a ghost.
No.
This was a psycho. The man lunged forward and screamed at Frank to get the girls. He wants them to go into the girls' bedroom. They all come into the bedroom, and then Frank somehow gets him walked over to where the closet is, and he closes him in the closet. And then he's trying to think of what to do.
Yeah.
They're on the second floor. He is holding the door shut.
And the guy is in there with the weapons,
pounding and screaming and banging against the door. And that's when Tina ran to her window, threw it open, and climbed up onto the sill. And Frank is screaming, "No, don't do it."
What, was she going to jump?
She jumped.
Oh, no.
She hit the ground, but she scrambled to her feet and she took off running through the yard to the neighbor's house. She's banging on the door until they let her in, barely able to catch her breath. And she's like, "Call the police." So when dispatch answers, Tina gave them her home number, but nobody picks up the phone. Tina, she was just inconsolable. First of all, the sheer terror of everything that's happened. And then they're trying to call over there because they don't want him to kill.
So dispatch has her on the line, and then they're also on another line trying to ring her house, but they can't get anybody.
Exactly. Trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And they kind of don't believe.
They're not taking her seriously.
Right. Yes.
It's horrible.
She's just knowing that her dad and sister are probably dead.
Yeah.
So police arrive as quickly as they could, and they did surround the Bowen house.
They did come?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought they weren't going to come.
No, they did come, and they had their guns drawn, and actually ended up making their way inside, calling out, until finally they heard Frank's voice screaming for help from upstairs. When they reached him, Frank was frantic and told them the man was either still somewhere inside or he had gone out the back. So officers swept through every room in the house, not once, but multiple times. They searched the yard, the surrounding woods. They searched the nearby roadways. and there was literally no sign of this intruder, except for they did find a hatchet and a steel wrench that were discarded upstairs, but those belonged to Frank.
They were his.
Mm-hmm. The man himself, he was gone. And it was like he vanished into thin air. The police brought in tracking dogs and dusted for fingerprints. There just wasn't much to go on. Whoever it was, they had this wig and makeup, so it's not like they can identify them. And then Frank realized that this is the person that's been inside their home, probably watching them.
Yeah, harassing those girls all that time.
Exactly, tormenting his daughters, maybe even standing behind doors, watching them undress. It was a sickening realization, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had accused his daughters, of hysteria and of lying, and he was ate up with regret. But, now this monster is still out there. Mm. So Frank, he, of course, profusely apologizes to his daughters. And he's like, I will never, ever doubt you again. And they forgave him. I mean, he just didn't know. But Frank takes his daughters and they went to go stay with family. Because he's like, there's no way we're staying in this house.
Nope, I wouldn't either.
2 days later, Frank called the police again. He had pulled up to his house, planning to run inside and to grab a few belongings to take back to where the family had been staying. But the moment he stepped out of his car, that same eerie skin prickling feeling kind of washed over him, and he scanned the yard. He looked up, and in the second story window, that man was staring straight down at him.
I haven't heard this before, but I've seen a movie very similar. I wonder if it's based on this.
Okay, it could be.
We'll see. Okay.
So, of course, his blood just runs cold, and he calls the police. At this point, though, they're thinking this family's kind of crazy. But they come, and, their duty is duty, and they show up kind of half smirking, and, they're going to make another sweep through the house just to be sure. Once again, there's no signs of forced entry. The doors are still locked, just like Frank had left them. And so an officer took a key from Frank and he steps inside the house. This time, though, he saw something that made him believe them. There were knives stabbed into the walls. Messages were scrawled in shaving cream across mirrors and doors. One read, I'll be back. Another said, I'm going to kill your whole family. Another says, I'm in your room. And then another photograph of Tina stuck to the wall with a kitchen knife through it.
Now, I wonder what this guy has against Tina in particular.
Right. As the officers make their way down the hall, they found the barrel of a BB gun sticking out from one of the bedroom closets. But when he opened the closet, of course, no one's there. Whether somebody had been there or not is now undeniable. The Bowens had not imagined this. The officer searched through the house room by room again, but this time with kind of a sense of urgency. Even they were kind of scared.
Yeah.
They opened closets, they looked under beds, they checked every crawl space, and none of them noticed anything off. In one of the bedroom closets, there was a built-in panel, though, at the back that they found that had looked like a part of the wall, but the edges were just slightly uneven, like it had been removed and then put back one too many times. And so an officer reached out and grabbed that panel and pulled it open, and right there, crammed inside this narrow space between the walls, crouched down there, was...
that man.
Yes. Rough
Heck no. Oh
and
my
dirty,
gosh.
who had been hiding inside the walls of this home.
All those months.
And he was not a full-grown man either. He was a 16-year-old boy. He was dirty. He was scruffy. He wouldn't tell them his name, but he did crawl out because they were like, we will splatter your brains all. I mean, they were not playing.
No.
They were literally like, we will kill you. And so he decided to come out on his own. They quickly placed him in handcuffs and put him under arrest. And the scene there was so surreal. Officers said it was just like something out of a horror movie. They're searching now these crawl spaces behind the walls, and they find these makeshift peepholes drilled into the girls' bedrooms. They find bits of food. They find pictures of the family, the wife's clothing, some of her personal items that had just gone missing from the house. Crazy stuff. So later, down at the station, they learned the suspect's name was Daniel LaPlante. He was this 16-year-old strange teenager from a few towns over. Daniel had a history of bizarre behavior and petty crimes. He'd actually broken into homes before and stolen things and was known for being, weird is the best word I can come up with, but nothing on the level of what he had done to this family. But the crazy thing was that they were targeted because he was stalking Tina.
And where did he know her from?
It's believed that Daniel broke into the Bowens' house at some point just trying to see what he could get away with right before the mother died.
Oh.
When he saw these pictures of Tina, he liked, I guess, what he saw. And so he looked her phone number up and starts calling her, pretending to be this teenage boy named Danny, sweet talking her over the phone, telling her he's the captain of the football team. And he eventually asked her on a date, which she was happy to go on. And when Tina finally met him face to face, though, she was super shocked because he was not what he had portrayed himself to be at all. He was like unkempt and weird and greasy looking and awkward. And he just gave her an uncomfortable feeling all around. He didn't want to talk about music or school or typical teenage stuff. Instead, he asked her these weird questions about her mother's recent death. He wanted to know how she felt about it, how often she cried. And she was nice to him because she was just a nice girl, but Tina ended things after that one meeting.
Yeah.
But Daniel was not done with her. And he developed this full-on obsession. So Daniel was arrested, and he was charged with multiple counts of breaking and entering, armed assault in a dwelling, and other related charges. He actually was also charged with kidnapping because he had held the dad and the other daughter there. He was sent to a juvenile facility because, he's only 16. Investigators kind of start weaving together the pieces of Daniel's life. And this was a deeply troubled young man. Born on May 15th in 1970 in the small town of Townsend, Massachusetts. His parents split up when he was little, and his mama raised him as a single parent for a while before she remarried and had 2 more boys. Now, Daniel's childhood was tragic. He claimed that he was sexually and emotionally abused by several adults in his life, including his own father and then his stepfather. But his biological father was the worst of all. He later attended St. Bernard's High School in Fitchburg. He did, in fact, play football and ran track. But Daniel struggled a lot in school. He was diagnosed with dyslexia early on, and he also dealt with other learning disabilities. I feel like it sounded a lot like ADHD. His classmates described him as creepy and weird. He was known to be a loner, and people in the neighborhood just thought he was strange. We all know kids like that.
Yeah.
He didn't bathe or wear deodorant. Do you know what I mean? And it's sad. Like, as adults, we know how sad it is, but kids can be cruel. As a teenager, his mom took him to a psychiatrist because of his odd behavior and like his lack of hygiene and those types of things, and just, really trying to get him some help. He was doing pretty good in therapy, but then all of a sudden it just stopped. He would later say that the psychiatrist had been touching him inappropriately.
And do his claims of that is there any evidence on those?
No.
What about the ones from his...
None of them have ever been... Yeah. That could have just been a thing for court to help him get in less trouble.
It's so hard to know because he obviously is disturbed. And it makes you think maybe something's happened to him
Right.
to make him that way. But at the same time, disturbed people can make up horrible lies.
Right. Exactly.
That's a hard one.
It is. But Daniel did seem to dive like headfirst into trouble after that. I mean, it would explain some things.
Right.
So he started breaking into homes in his neighborhood, stealing, and then later just kind of moving things around, leaving these unsettling messages or just to watch people while they slept. So his obsession with Tina was just, that's kind of the latest in his escalation in a long line of, disturbing behavior. And tragically, I feel like the warning signs had been there, but they were overlooked, I don't know, or misunderstood, because I think sometimes parents just don't know what to do.
Right.
So Daniel was in this juvenile facility until October of 1987. So it was close to a year, because that had happened in December of 86. And then in 87, they set a $10,000 bond for him while he was awaiting trial. And his mother would actually take out a second mortgage on her house to put up bail for him. She was happy to have her son home, and he seemed to be doing really well. But this little jackass, he jumped right back into it. Just kept up these little burglary sprees, breaking into the neighbors' homes. And on October 14th in 1987, he broke into a neighbor's house and stole 2 .22 caliber guns. And about a month later, on November 16th, sometime between 11:30 a.m. and 3:30 that afternoon, Daniel had broken into the home of the Gustafson family. He made off with this cordless phone and 2 cable boxes, a TV remote, and he even grabbed like some coins from their Liberty silver dollar collection. This family, there's a dad who's a lawyer, there's a mother who works at the church nursery, and then they have 2 children, a 7-year-old little girl and a 5-year-old little boy. Then on December 1st in 1987, Priscilla Gustafson, the preschool teacher, the wife, and mother who was pregnant with her 3rd child, she may not have even known it yet, picked up her little boy, 5-year-old William, from a babysitter at about 1 p.m. When she walked into her front door, Daniel was waiting for them inside. He had made his way through the woods about a half a mile from his own house to the Gustafsons. He was armed with one of those .22 caliber guns that he'd just stolen weeks earlier. When Priscilla walked through that door, he pointed the gun at her and forced both her and William into the bedroom. He shoved William into the closet and tied Priscilla to a bed using makeshift ligatures, gagging her with one of his socks, and then he raped her.
Oh, and that little boy was in the closet.
In the closet.
And see, his mom should not even have gotten him out.
No, she shouldn't have.
Knowing that he's done these things.
But that's not the worst of it, because then he shoots her twice in the head at point blank range, using one of the pillows from the bed to muffle the shots. While her little boy is right there hearing his mom being tortured and killed. Then he took the little terrified William out of the closet and forced him down the hallway. He's hysterically crying.
And how old is he again?
5. He takes him into the bathroom, and this is a warning. This is a tough part right here. Daniel filled the tub with water, and he drowned that little boy.
No.
In the bathtub.
Oh, he is sick. Oh, that's awful.
And then as Daniel got ready to leave the house, he heard somebody pull up, and it scared him until he realized that it was 7-year-old Abigail getting off of the school bus.
No.
So this poor little girl walks right into a nightmare.
Oh my gosh.
Daniel grabs her as she walks through the door and dragged her screaming into a downstairs bathroom where he filled up the bathtub while beating her because, she's fighting back. She doesn't know what's going on. And then he held her little head under the water until she was drowned as well. When Priscilla's husband, Andrew, comes home from work that evening, his whole house decorated with Christmas lights, he comes in to find his world is been completely ripped apart. He finds his wife and his 2 children. I
have no words.
Not imagine. When they came and investigated, the lead detective said, "What has Daniel LaPlante been up to?"
So he knew.
You know, these serial killers, they have these like weird things that they do.
Yes.
So I don't know if you remember, but at the Bowen house, he had those wine glasses out that were filled. Well, he did the same thing here, except for with beer. And there were just other little things that made the crime scene feel very familiar.
Yeah. And he only lived a half a mile away. So I'm glad they didn't suspect the husband.
2 days after the murders, police brought Daniel in for questioning. He said that he'd been home watching MTV that day, and then he had gone to a birthday party and came back home. I mean, he hadn't done anything. And at that point, they just didn't have enough solid evidence to arrest him. Later that same day, officers showed up at his house hoping to interview him again. They had more questions because they had done some search of the woods. They had found several different things that they knew it was him. But still, they didn't have quite enough to arrest him. But they wanted to interview him. When Daniel saw the police coming to the porch, he took off running. And y'all, that kicked off this full-blown manhunt. Police officers, canine units, helicopters searching for him. And in the middle of all that, Daniel managed to make his way on foot to a nearby home where he stole a van. Then he held a woman hostage. Thankfully, it was briefly. Then he headed toward Ayer, Massachusetts. So a police officer spotted the van and tried pulling him over, but Daniel ditches the vehicle and ran to a nearby lumberyard. While he was at the lumberyard, he's threatening the lumberyard owner with a gun before he hid himself in the dumpster. And then these 2 officers come in and they tell him, like, you might as well come out. You're done. Like, you're caught. So that's when Daniel LaPlante was finally arrested and taken into custody. After his arrest, he was taken to Bridgewater State Hospital and underwent 3 weeks of psychiatric testing. Thankfully, it didn't take long for his case to head to trial, and Daniel did plead innocent.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, idiot.
In October of 1988, just under a year after the murders, he stood trial for the murders of Priscilla, William, and Abigail Gustafson.
I'm going to tell you right now, if he gets anything less than the death penalty, that will be just so disappointing.
The prosecution laid everything out in heartbreaking detail. They would not let them bring in the rape. I hate when they do that. I do not understand it because it could prejudice the jury.
You need to see what kind of behavior he's capable of.
You need to have all the evidence. That's not right.
Yeah.
So the physical evidence, though, the stolen items, the murder weapon, it was all there. They had it. And the jury didn't need much convincing.
Yeah.
On October 25th, he was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. And the very next day, the judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. 1 for each of these lives he had taken, served back to back. And he did deserve death, for sure. I 100% believe that. But he was 16, and that was not going to happen.
Right.
But years later, in 2019, he starts filing these appeals. Because, it came up that if you commit a crime when you're a child, a lot of these murders and stuff are getting out because of that, because, their brains weren't fully developed. And so he starts filing appeals, arguing that he was a teenager when he committed these murders and his sentence was too harsh.
This is making me mad.
He claimed that being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole as a juvenile was unconstitutional. He pointed out those newer rulings about how the justice system should treat youthful offenders differently because their brains aren't fully developed and that they are capable of rehabilitation. Well, his case went back and forth for a while, but in 2017, a judge heard the appeal and decided to uphold the original sentence. The court ruled that in Daniel's case, the brutality of those crimes outweighed any argument about his age.
Absolutely.
In other words, they know good and well that he'd do it again if he had a half a chance, because he was pure evil.
He was.
As of now, Daniel LaPlante is serving his life sentence in a Massachusetts prison, and I'm thankful to let y'all know that he's not going anywhere.
Good.
Anytime soon. I want to come back to the Gustafsons, and I want to just say that Priscilla's husband, Andrew, spoke at his family's funeral, and he stood by those two small caskets.
Their
and
dad.
Yes. And that larger coffin that held his wife. And he said, never say that this is God's will. God loved us, and he showered us with all good things. They were just the most beautiful family. Struggling to retain his composure, he recalled all the hugging and the closeness of his family. He said that it could never have been better because it was the best. So the Gustafsons were teenage sweethearts. They had been together for years and years. They graduated in 1972 and were married in Townsend in 75. Abigail was in second grade, and she was active in their church's music program, and so was the little boy. Their pastor, as he was preaching their funeral, said that we have come to celebrate 3 beautiful lives. Short though they may have been, they were lives of beauty. It's time to remember when Billy was at his most exuberant. It's time to remember those moments before Abby would sing her special and was full of anxiety, and Priscilla would say, "You can do this." And she did. As a community, if we love Priscilla and those kids, then what we've got to do is build a community of the same love that we felt for them. We must hug and kiss each other every day and tell each other, "I love you." And make that a way of life for our community. Priscilla was actually born here in North Carolina.
Really?
In Cherry Point, yeah.
Wow.
That family was just a very, very special family. And I do want to come back to a couple of things. Sometimes we want to tie our theology up like in a pretty little bow and know exactly what we believe. It is hard to understand how God could allow something like that to happen. It is difficult. But I think that Andrew's faith is so inspiring, but he doesn't blame that on God. He is just, you can tell, has that spirit of gratitude, grateful for the time that he was able to love them. We don't understand it because we're so finite, but if we understood how wonderful heaven is for somebody like them and how horrible hell is for somebody like him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's heavy.
That is.
That's a lot. And it does make you chew on theology when you have to come up against it. And we're not coming up against it by telling the story or hearing it even, know. We're just trying to wrap our minds around it. I cannot imagine trying to wrap your mind around really living that and that being your reality. Just the consideration of that story does make you chew on your theology a little bit.
And I'm sure that it did for that whole community.
Yeah.
As far as Daniel LaPlante goes, I don't know that there has been a case where I've just thought, of course, the chicken coop murders.
Yeah.
To me, he's on the same level, just pure evil.
This one, I was thinking, this one is right up there with that. That one was hard to hear.
Yeah, it was. This is what I'm thinking. Okay, his mother paid all that money to get him out of that juvenile facility. But where was she when he's living in walls for months?
You're a 16-year-old.
And when they went into his bedroom to search, they said there was pornography everywhere.
So in his bedroom.
In her home, pornography everywhere.
So what's going on here?
Right. I mean, staying
what kind of mother? I don't know. It does make you question.
And I know it was off and on. I don't think he was there for a full 6 months. He would come and go though, all the time. When you think about how easily he could have just killed them and would have, I believe he was definitely working up to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, he would have for sure. And you can only imagine how they felt to escape it, especially after he killed that other young family, how they must have felt realizing how close they were to that. Oh, goodness. earlier in the story, I was thinking, because you said it happened in the 80s, that way back in the 70s. So I was young. I was probably 7 or 8 and probably had no business watching this movie. But there was some movie that came out in the 70s. I think it was like a TV movie. So I don't know that it was actually at the theater. And I don't even remember the title, but it was something, maybe some of our listeners will know. My sisters may know. But it was something called Bad Rodney or something like that. I don't know. But it was about a guy who was living in the attic of this person's house, and he was looking at the girl through these peepholes and doing stuff like that. I was very young, so I don't remember how it all ended. As soon as you started telling me that movie popped into my head, and I was thinking maybe that was patterned after this, but it couldn't have been because this story didn't happen until much later. So we just looked up that movie that I vaguely remembered. It was actually called Bad Ronald.
From 1976.
74.
74.
So way before this guy.
Yeah.
But it's so similar because it said that this movie was about a guy who lived in this house in the walls after his mother died and fell for one of the teenage girl residents and is starting to like scare them, and it's called him a perverted teenage boy. It just sounds so similar.
It does. You got to wonder if he had watched that and just copied it.
It just sounds
so familiar. It sounds so much like that. That is insane.
That is insane. But think about it. He was born in the 70s. I think you said 70.
Yeah.
And so if I'm watching that movie at, that age, he's my age. He's probably did see it or read it. He's one of the ones, though, that you really do wish that the prison justice system would have taken over.
Oh, I know, but I'm sure he's had some butt whippings in there, and I hope he has.
Horrible. Well, those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
Now, I'm sure all you true crime junkies know from experience there's nothing worse than being caught hiding in somebody's closet wearing women's clothes. But there's nothing better to break that awkward, uncomfortable silence than talking about hard times and true crimes. You can talk about how many episodes you've downloaded, which episode is your favorite, how many times you've bought the girls a coffee, and you can tell them how to go on the website, like, subscribe, and share every episode. That's guaranteed to fast track the healing process. So you make sure you tell everybody you know, even if they're living in a crawl space in your basement, to check out Hard Times and True Crimes. Till next time, goodbye.